Many of you have laughed at an idea of mixing metal in Dolby Atmos format. And indeed, without much of an experience, you may only think of Dolby Atmos as a platform for cinematic sounds. Hence, the idea of bass guitar flying around the room is the best association that may come to your mind. However, Dolby Atmos is so much more than that. The new format provides better dynamics and depth, and allows for significantly more space to be utilized for your complex elements in the mix without sacrificing of their qualities. In this video, I want to show you a stereo mix versus a Dolby Atmos binaural mix of the same song that I've done some time ago for the band called the Archanan, and then we can discuss what Atmos has brought to the table. Please put your headphones on, as we can only hear binaural audio on headphones quite obviously. And now a bit of a disclaimer. I've done this mix during the lockdowns of 2021 as a trial to see whether metal is to be mixed in Atmos. And we saw big benefits. We've done that at Red Road Immersive Studios here in Melbourne, Victoria. However, this is definitely not the very best representation of what Atmos can do to metal, because that was just a start and a trial run. And even that allowed a lot to happen, and now we can dissect that in a great form. So just keep in mind that this is just a first test, and there are a lot more possibilities to make the mixes even better. And now let's do Atmos. Hey, I'm Dr. Mike Trubetskov, the mad scientist of metal, and I'm here to bring valuable information regarding modern metal production, mixing, and as I explore the uncharted waters of the Dolby Atmos as well. Mate, like and subscribe to not miss it out. Now let's go. In this session, we have a stereo mastered file, mastered by my friend Nicholas at Panorama Mastering, and we have the Atmos Mix, which is a binaural render of the mix that I've done at Red Road Immersive. So this isn't mastered, and just a bit of a disclaimer, this is not an apples to apples comparison, unfortunately, and I don't think that there is a possibility of that. So we have to take into account that this Atmos mix isn't quite mastered, and the bass compression isn't the same. And I will talk more about that in details. However, these two files are level matched, and this make a fair representation of how in particular Dolby Atmos would differ from a stereo version. So straight away I wanna provide some immediate thoughts on this comparison, as I haven't done it that thoroughly yet. This is the first time. Here's what I'm gonna say. Stereo version kinda sounds better because it is so much more familiar. It is nicely squashed, it has more presence, it's very thick and rich but squashed as hell. Every element is kinda stamped together, and sometimes it's really hard to distinguish between synthesizers and guitars. Dolby Atmos version sounds kinda a little bit more raw, but once you get used to it, once you get into listening to it, it sounds fuller. It sounds fuller, it builds dynamics better, and there is much more room. I'm not sure if you were able to hear it, but synthesizers in particular stand out so much more in Dolby Atmos. Some certain lead guitar parts stand out so much more. And just the drums sound more natural, although if you wanted to, you could squash them as well. It's just a little bit harder with the Atmos routing. However, in this mix we decided to not. We decided to keep things more natural, and they just work. So there is no more clash between bass guitar, drums and normal guitar in the lower register, because they can be panned away. And they just sound fuller, richer, and they work better. So these are my 2 cents of a direct comparison, initial thoughts. And now let's jump onto a more structured discussion here. So now let's talk about the actual benefits, the real benefits, objective benefits that Dolby Atmos can bring to your metal mixes based on this example here. And number 1 is no need to overprocess your elements. When mixing metal in stereo, you're naturally lacking space immediately. Guitars, for instance, take up the whole sonic spectrum from your lows, your mids and your highs, and therefore, when you combine this with bass and the kick, you're basically done. You run out of space. Therefore, you need to start carving that space quite aggressively by EQing a lot, compressing heavily each element just for them to fit and stay present. The best metal mixes that I know of have a great degree of separation of the main elements, but also fullness, richness and power of each of those elements as well. And that balance is incredibly hard to achieve, as you guys and gals obviously know. With Dolby Atmos though, not so much, because you have significantly more room and more depth to put elements in. For example, you have your front left and right, but you also have your side speakers and rear speakers and top speakers, so you can position your toms to the front and guitars to the backs if you want to, or your leads can go up at the top and your bass guitar can only stay in the center. And that just allows you to put them together without sacrificing the sound quality and the natural character that you wish to retain. Or you may not wish to retain the real character, and you can process them as much as you want, but the advantage still retains. You can put them together without clashing and without having the masking frequency problems as much as in the stereo mix. And quite literally, my observations with Dolby Atmos are the following. If the tone source is good, you do not need to process it at all. You can just use the panner and pan it to the according position, and it just works. Dolby Atmos Panner is a very powerful tool, and it provides a lot of sonic difference just by using your size, height and front to rear positioning as well. So this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest advantages, as you just have more creative outlet for your music to be heard properly, the way you imagine it, without sacrificing as much of those elements in the stereo little shoebox we're all used to be working in. Advantage number 2 in my experience is space and depth. As metal is getting more and more digitized and polished these days, productions are growing bigger. Amazing vocal layer stacks, multiple lead guitars, massive synth arrangements, or even quad tracking your guitars. All of these elements are heavily crumbled together in your stereo mix to barely get heard. And if you want the tone and the character, something unique that you've been so carefully creating for your music to come out, you need these elements to be heard, because devil is hidden in the details. That's where the real power of Dolby Atmos comes to us. You can place extra lead guitars in the top speakers, play with synths in the rears, and indeed make some of these elements move around and fly around the listener, but not for the purpose of showing off or not for the purpose of just exploring the Dolby Atmos potential, but to create a groove effect which ties with the message of your song rhythmically and therefore translates the emotion even more. Well, let's check out one of the examples here. Okay, let's listen to this fragment here with some synthesizers not being that audible in the stereo mix. Starting with the stereo mix, just pay attention to the synthesizers and the guitar relationship in this fragment here for me, please. So squashed. You can't really distinguish between what the synth line is doing and the guitar line is doing. They kind of work together, and that's good. That's what we're used to. That's what it is supposed to do. But here's what Atmos did to this part. Right? This creates movement. The guitar parts are now more separated from the synth, but not as much so that they don't work together. It's more like the synth evolves around the listener and creates a more hypnotic atmosphere, which suits this part. And then some panning movements, but not panning, pretty much 360-degree movement of extra guitars in the end really creates the better transition. So this is a big advantage of Atmos can do, and we can only scratch the surface because this was pretty much the first mix that I've done. Advantage number 3, better sonic flexibility and less compression. We are used to hearing metal so heavily compressed because of the, let's call it, limitations of the stereo technology. You may be used to it and like it, or you may hate it and want to move on from overcompression. Either way, working in stereo, you are tied to the little small shoe box to fit everything in. Atmos to me is a more mature format which allows for both. You want it compressed, you can have it. You want it natural, you can have it as well. You don't naturally require much of compression to make things fit and work. If you want it though, go for it. One of the things that I have to mention though is that Atmos routing is a little bit more sophisticated than stereo. I'm used to working with buses a lot in stereo, applying compression in series to my mix bus, sometimes drums bus, sometimes a lot of parallel compression, guitars bus, vocals bus, etc. In Atmos, although you can compress buses, you don't do it as much because it is more complicated. You have to route them properly, and then all of a sudden you have 7.1.4 channels to compress, so your regular plugins may crap out. There are workarounds and there are ways to achieve that sound, that's fine, but it is a little bit more difficult, so just something to keep in mind when considering Atmos. Let's sum up. I've only scratched the surface of what Atmos can bring to the table for your metal mixes, and this example is not apples to apples, as I mentioned, because we're listening to a mix versus a master, we're listening to something that I've done as a trial versus something that I've been confident in doing for years in stereo, but I think it displays nicely in an A-B fashion the possibilities of the format, what it can bring, and what it has brought to this track. I hope that once the technology becomes more accessible, more and more people will turn and consider Atmos for their metal rigs. And here's the disclaimer: you do not need an Atmos rig setup. You do not need the crazy amount of speakers at home in order to start working with this. In fact, all you need to get started in Dolby Atmos is Dolby Atmos renderer, which is $300, I believe, and a free trial which goes for 3 months, and you need Logic Pro X, which has binaural capacities. And then you can start experimenting by panning your things in the 3D Atmos field, playing around with heights, playing around with size, and just exploring the possibilities. And in fact, my recommendation would be prepare your mixes at home in the Atmos format, do all the routing and prep stuff, and then hit the big studio when you're ready to finish it up. Or send it across. That's how I predict this format application will work in the nearest future. How do you find the difference between the demonstrated mixes? Please let me know. I'm very, very curious to hear your thoughts. And until next time, rock on, cheers!